Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, all two of us. I'd like to welcome you this evening to the Carson City Airport Authority meeting. It is Wednesday, February 21st. It is 6 p.m. We are in the Sierra Room of the Carson City Community Center. Madam Secretary, will you call the roll?
Chairperson Law.
Here.
Vice Chair Val.
Here.
Member Barrett.
Here.
Member Golden.
Here.
Member Harris.
Here.
Member Harvey.
Here.
Member Rogers.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Will you stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Approval of the minutes of the past meetings of the Airport Authority. Have you all read and received and had a chance to read the minutes? If so, do I have a motion to accept the minutes, or are there any corrections or changes to the minutes? Vice Chair Val has moved to accept. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Member Barrett. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed, nay? None heard. Motion carries unanimously. Modification of the agenda. The chairman reserves the right to modify the agenda in order to most effectively process agenda items. Items may be taken out of order. Items may be combined for consideration by the authority. Items may be pulled or removed from the agenda at any time. I have had no requests, nor do I intend to.
I have a request.
Member Golden?
Madam Chair, may I recommend at your discretion, actually,
Mike.
oh, sorry. Okay. Madam Chair, might I recommend, and again, this is just at your discretion, that we swap items 1 and 2 so that item 2 is heard first. I think that you may have some people in the public here just speaking to item number 2. Just a suggestion, your discretion.
Anyone opposed to that change in the agenda order? I would accept that. Thank you. We will take that agenda item previous to item F1. Is there any public comment at this point? Members of the public who wish to address the Airport Authority may speak on agendized and non-agendized matters related to the airport. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person or topic. If your item requires extended discussion, please request Chairman to calendar the matter for a future airport meeting. Is there any public comment at this point? Seeing none, we will move on. Item F2, which is now being taken as F1 for possible action, discussion to approve a schedule for gate card renewals and possible changes to fees associated with gate cards and any other related issues. Mr. Zatilla.
Thank you. First off, I tried to make this kind of an open-ended issue so we could discuss anything relative to the gate card issue, even though there's just a few main topics. In discussing this with Member Golden, I think his recommendation I agree with, and that's what I would recommend as part of this issue. That being that we change the due date for renewals of gate cards to the same date for everybody, which would be June the 1st with a 30-day grace period for that. And Mr. Golden added also that they be notified by March 31st. And I agree with that too, which is something I've been working on having the ability to do that. And second part of that would be the costs for new cards would be $25, or replacement cards for lost cards would be the same, $25, and reactivating cards that were, what's the word I'm looking for? Ones that are, that were expired, that's the word I'm looking for, sorry. Would be $20 for those. And the difference being that we don't have to buy a card in that case. The other ones we have to pay for the cost of a card. Then the part 2 of that, or 3, whatever we're at, would be to eliminate the $10 annual fee. I feel at this point, my opinion is that we have just over $20,000 in the gate card fund, and we have used, in addition to purchasing a new gate this year for $3,800, there's only been a few $100s used out of that fund over the time it's been in existence for repairs to the gates. So I think there's adequate funds in there, and with the amount of new card sales and replacement cards, it should be enough to maintain the fund with that income alone. But I will leave that in your hands. And a couple other issues that I want to bring up about this. One thing is on the topic of eligibility for gate cards, who is allowed to get a gate card from us. I put in this item, I included the evolutionary process that went through, that's gone through the gate cards so far. And when I worked here previously, I was the one that authored the very first item about that, most of which is what we're working with now. Part of that has been kind of taken out of context and not used properly, in my opinion. And what that is the issue about issuing gate cards to contractors. This was intended to be for construction work that goes on the airport. When we have a contractor working on the airport for a limited period of time, that they should be eligible, of course, to have gate cards to have access to the airport for that. And the reason this has become a problem is because the other part of this was that I intentionally did not include employees of FBOs in the eligibility. And the reason for that is that I feel that an FBO that has an employee should purchase the card themselves and issue it to their employee and not have it directly issued by us. The reason being that if that employee leaves and is no longer working there, we have no way of knowing that, whereas that FBO does know when his employee leaves. And if they don't return the gate card, they can simply call us and we deactivate the card and we're secure once again. Whereas the way it is now, if that employee leaves and nobody tells us, we have somebody that has no reason to be on the airport but has access. So recently I've had people that didn't want to go along with that come in and say, well, he doesn't really work for me, he's a contractor. Well, you know, whether he's working under a contract or not, that wasn't the intent of this rule, and I'd like to get that clarified. And again, this is up to your discretion how you feel about that. And one last minor thing is that was not included, and I don't know that it needs to be included, but I also feel that chapter members of the EAA should be also eligible for a gate card. Many of them do a lot of things on the airport and are involved with things here, so again, that's kind of a minor consideration, so I'll leave it to you for questions or discussion now.
Questions of Mr. Zatella? Comments? Mr. Barrett?
If we went with that recommendation you had about the FBOs having the cards, are the cards individualized when they give their employee a card and then he quits, but he doesn't get it back, but he calls you and he says, you know which card? How would you know which card went to that employee, or does that matter?
That's what the FBO should be responsible for. The card would be issued to him. If he wants to give it to somebody, he's the guy that should be keeping track of what he gave to that person. And if that person leaves, he needs to let us know. Because otherwise we have no control over it.
But what kind of teeth do we have if he doesn't let you know?
Well, we can penalize anybody that has a gate card by shutting off their gate cards and denying them access to the airport. That's the teeth we have.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Val?
I have a couple of comments actually about this, because I've had a steady stream of people coming into my office complaining about this issue. Number one, we are not a Part 139 airport. We have no legal requirement that we be doing these kinds of access controls. There's no TSA requirement, since there is no scheduled air service in and out of this airport. Secondly, there are large swaths of this airport that have nothing more than a barbed wire around them that aren't even complete 6-foot fences. So the northeast corner of the airport is a wide open access area for animals and stuff to come in and go around. When we start talking about things like controlling access and penalizing people and all this seems a little bit overkill and ridiculous for something that isn't really a problem at this airport. Some of the problems that we have been having airside are things like cars not yielding to airplanes, which is not fixed by this policy. I know at one point there was a set of rules that were put together, but I don't see anything addressed in this where we're requiring people to contractually obligate themselves to follow the rules when they're driving around airside. I've had personal experiences in airplanes where people failed to yield to me. I've had situations where our security company was darting across the runway with no radio or anything like that, and causing a hazard to aircraft. This policy doesn't fix that. Other airports that I know of that have similar access situations like this, like San Francisco or Oakland and places like that, the policy isn't necessarily that they're trying to sell cards. The policy is that they're giving you airside access. And the mechanism for doing that is handled in different ways, and there are different fees. If you're coming out there dropping a passenger at a private jet, you pay one fee. If you're a taxi or a livery carriage, you do something like that. And I'm absolutely not saying that we should do anything like that. But what's happening with those policies is they are licensing you to be airside, and I don't see anything in this policy that says we're giving people a license to conduct themselves appropriately when they're airside. Based on that, I think it's kind of ridiculous that we are putting things in here saying, oh, you have to be an FBO or you have to be that. There are lots of people who have reasons to be airside. One of those reasons is UPS. UPS delivers to tenants that are airside. Are we applying this policy to them, or are we extracting money from UPS and FedEx in order to do the normal course of business? What about some of our tenants in the Center Triangle who have a need to be there because they're completely landlocked? How do we decide which tenants are eligible for cards and which ones aren't? I would much prefer that we have a more open policy where we say, hey, this is the license fee and these are the conditions for airside access, and take away a lot of those restrictions and basically say, if you're willing to provide the insurance, you're willing to follow the rules, you're willing to pay the fee, we'll take your money, here's your card.
Any other discussion on the issue? Go ahead and respond, Mr. Zatilla, and then I'll get to you.
Just respond to one thing. When we issue a gate card, you have to fill out an application, and on that application, you sign that you agree to follow the rules that are in the rule book that's provided along with that gate card. So, yeah, there is backup for that, and I think You know, we discussed the same thing 9 years ago, and I made a point, frankly, of similar to what you're saying, that, you know, this is a public airport, shouldn't it be open to the public? And it was explained to me, no, it's not open to the public. It's open to the public that has a reason to be there. And so that's why these rules came about in the first place. And I'm just trying to clarify them so that they make some sense. And I'm trying to protect the airport in part with the business about the FBOs, because I don't want us to have the liability. So.
Mr. Golden?
Let me point out a couple of instances, and with all due respect, Brian, thank you for your comments. And the FAA, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, has been moving airports towards greater security. And that's one of the reasons we have gates at a lot of airports. I don't like it. Older pilot, Steve's been around. I won't call him older, but he's been flying a while. He and I fly. We don't like it because we remember the days when you could just drive onto the airport. I'll give you a few situations. I talked to someone today who called concerned about this policy, but let me give you a few situations that I know of personally that have occurred within the past decade. South Lake Tahoe had a crazed maniac get on the airport, steal a rental car. It's lucky he didn't hit an aircraft, let alone an expensive aircraft. Got off the airport with that rental car, got involved in a high-speed chase with that rental car, wrecked the rental car off airport, thankfully. Caused damage to the airport as he exited the airport. Silver Springs Airport, because they have no security out there, somebody who's very good with electronics and valve controls was able to rig the valve controls on their fuel system so that every time this person flew their aircraft into Silver Springs, they were getting fuel for free while they were stealing it. After about 2,000 gallons were lost, there was an arrest made. Truckee Airport. While I was on the board of directors there, we had a drugged up maniac blew right through one of the lightweight gates that we had there that was preventing vehicular access, started driving up and down the main runway midday, using it as his own personal drag strip from one end to the other, 7,000 feet. Didn't cause any damage to any aircraft. The airport was shut down. It took the Highway Patrol and the Nevada County Sheriff's Department quite a while to place spike strips out there, disable the vehicle, and arrest the driver. Also at Truckee Airport, middle of the night one night, somebody came in, broke into the FBO, stole a lot of tools, equipment, and parts. The issue of gates is not one I'm real fond of because I like to remember the way things were. The way things were are not the way things are. The gates are there for security purposes. We recently had a complaint at this airport. Some of the airport authority members may recall that complaint of someone trying to access the airport who had no business accessing the airport after hours, and it was reported by one of our more astute tenants. This was between midnight and 1 in the morning. Nobody wants damage, destruction, theft to occur on the airport, and for that reason, I think we need to address just the gate card policy, nothing more. The gates are there to restrict vehicular access as they should be. As for driving, there should be a driving policy. I trust there is. Okay, so when our gate card holders sign out a gate card, they sign off on the driving policy, which should be 20 miles an hour, yield to aircraft, or maximum 20, maybe it's 15. Thank you.
It's 20 miles an hour except on the Ring Road and Taxiway Charlie where it's 35. That's what's in place at this time. And that's another topic if you want to take that up later. Well, we can't do that tonight. That's driving rules.
Any other discussion or questions on this? Mr. Val?
Just one quick rebuttal. I don't want to be misinterpreted as saying I don't want the fences or anything like that. Each of those scenarios that you just gave, none of them really would be addressed by a gate card policy. They're addressed by putting fences up. And what I'm not saying is that Joe Blow should show up and, decide that he's going to apply for a card. But for the most part, people that are tenants at the airport that have a valid reason to be there, there have been cases in previous, I'd say month and a half, I counted 11 people that have come to my office complaining that their card access was shut off. Every single one of those people had a valid reason to be there, and they were all shut off. That's not preventing the kinds of scenarios, the kind of issues that you were talking about with like crime and stuff like that. As a item that I'd request that we put on the agenda sometime in the future, we need to look at the pedestrian access and stuff like that at the walk-in gates, because I've personally seen several homeless people, and I participated with the sheriffs hunting down over some of those hangars on your side. There are people that have been going out there, and we've witnessed them coming in and living in the sheriff's deputies that replied to that or showed up and responded actually knew who the person was because they have problems with him 2 or 3 times a week in Carson City. So we have a good idea of who's supposed to be there and who's not. But when people who've been longtime tenants that have been there for years should be having access and aren't having access, that's when we're starting to have issues that have been brought to my attention from some of those tenants that we're interfering with their quiet enjoyment of their property that they have leased. And that's a problem when this policy is kind of defective in that area and doesn't allow people who have legitimate access to be there. The suggestion was made that the FBOs be the ones to control that. I'm pretty sure a couple of the people that work at your outfit actually have cards directly from them and not through you, and I'm not sure what your opinion is on that, but I had mentioned to Dirk, I was like, this doesn't make sense. Those people have their cards. They have a right to be here because they have a job here. We shouldn't be going back and taking those away unless that was something that you wanted to do, but then that's a different conversation. Policy-wise, I don't know why the board would be interfering with what you're doing with your employees.
Mr. Golden, do you have comments about card issuance in your view?
The only issue I have with card issuance is it should be for any tenant of the airport. Anyone who has a hangar, an aircraft, anyone who has a business on the airport, if UPS or FedEx want access, they should have their own gate cards, okay? Really, it's really any tenant of the airport, nothing more, nothing less. And with all due respect, Dirk, I don't feel members of the EAA should just be granted gate cards. If they're a tenant,
They have an airplane.
because they have an airplane on the airport or they have a hangar on the airport, that's one thing. Otherwise, they can just walk over there from the parking lot. It's really no different than pulling in through the gate and walking in. Those are my comments.
Member Val.
I have one more on the EA thing. I second what you just said about EA having lots of people on the side. When they're doing their barbecues and stuff like that, they often will park where the airplanes are supposed to be. And when I mentioned earlier that we've had problems with people yielding to traffic, I would say just anecdotally that half of the people I've had problems with yielding are EAA members that are driving around on the ramp and won't yield to an airplane. So I would strongly suggest that they be encouraged to use the parking lot, of which they have landside access to in ample supply, before they decide they're going to start taking spots away from airplanes, which we don't have a lot of supply of parking for.
Okay. Is there any public comment on this?
I have just a,
Sorry.
I guess
Sorry, Bradley.
a comment or a suggestion. It seems to me we're getting a little beyond the discussion topic here, because we're really getting into, we were kind of trying to set fees, and now we're really talking a lot more in terms of detail on policy. And it seems like what we're, and I think what Brian has said is anybody with a legitimate purpose for being at the airport and working at the airport needs a card. And you have taken a step in defining what that is by tenants and FBO and et cetera, et cetera. And there's two ways to go here. We can either say the manager gets to decide who has a reason to be there, or we can define this in a more detailed policy. And I just don't think that's something we can accomplish tonight. So, and I think until we get that policy nailed down, that we're probably ahead of ourselves in terms of when it should be that the policy goes into effect and how much we're going to be charging. So I hate to put it off, but it sounds to me like we're talking policy and not. Yeah. Now, if everybody's comfortable with the fee structure he's presented, I'm fine voting on it tonight. But I got to say we have to revisit this. We can't solve this policy issue tonight. I think it should be agendized.
If I can just respond to that, thank you for jumping in. I was about to say the exact same thing. You raised some really good issues, but they're outside the scope. The first. Right, but what we did is originally it was just resetting the date, a single date for renewal of cards, and then we enlarged it in large part due to some public comments to address the fees themselves. These broader policy issues and the driving policy and those things, they are important things, no question about it, but they're a little out of the scope of what we noticed here. One thing I just wanted to ask is I was following along, I thought, with the recommendation that I was hearing, but I didn't understand the part about you're going to get rid of the $10 renewal fee. Then why do you have a time period for people having to tell you to renew it and to cut it off? Is that simply so that if someone doesn't send you this friendly email saying, renew my card, then you'll deactivate it? Okay, so, and that's all fine and good. I just want to make sure I understand what's being discussed. And the logic for not collecting the fee, even though there are costs associated with airport manager time and the facilities, you're saying that you're not going to collect the fee because you have enough money for your matching grants? I guess I don't understand the not collecting the fee part, and this is not my decision to make. I just want to make sure I understand it going forward, because I was a little surprised to hear that part. I just didn't understand.
If I can comment, as I recall in the last meeting, one of the things we said was that the $10 fee was more trouble than it was worth. From an administrative standpoint, there was just way too much time involved for the income, but we do need control over who has cards, and that does mean checking in that the person's still on the airport, that they still have the same email, they still have the same telephone, the same contact people.
Member Golden.
Got a point of inquiry and then a comment to the matter that you addressed, Steve. Don't we already have a gate card policy in effect, Dirk, that dictates who receives cards at this time?
Yeah, we do. I only wanted to clarify one issue, and that was the issue with the FBOs, and that they would be the ones to receive the gate card, and they could in turn lend them to an employee. The other thing that I want to say is, I've lost my train of thought here, and I'm sorry.
Dirk, what you're saying is you want the FBOs to control those just as though they were controlling a key to their building.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, God, I forgot.
I have one comment. To address your point, Steve, the other reason why we wanted to waive that $10 fee is, A, be a friendly airport, because it's a point of contention with tenants, and virtually every single airport that I have a gate card for, and I have a few, obviously, there's no charge for that card in the first place. They just give it to you, and we're charging for it. Okay, we charge $25 once. That should be enough. The purpose of the renewal is, look, people leave, I hate to say it, they die. they stop flying. You know, I got a guy who just contacted us, said, hey, I'm selling the airplane. Effective March 1st, we're leaving the hangar. Airplane's leaving. You get people who move off the airport for one reason or another. So in order to maintain control, we want to know annually that this person's still on the airport. Here's their tail number. Here's how to reach them via email or phone, and here's where they're at. That was the whole point of this.
I have one other comment. I remember what I was going to say. You made a comment about matching funds, and the gate card fund is in a separate bank account. It is designated for gate repairs and maintenance only. It is not designated for matching funds, and on top of that, there's enough money in there to replace all 4 gates, all of the card readers, all of the drive units for those twice. We've got plenty of money there. We don't need matching funds for the gates.
Okay, we do have an ACIP plan with a gate project in it. Those funds are eligible for use. I remember distinctly when that discussion was had by the members of the authority, Morris White was adamant about it, that that's what that money would be used for. So when you say it can't be used for matching funds,
Okay.
that is not correct. That's not
Okay.
accurate. But the bottom line is, if you guys are comfortable that there's enough money in that account to take care of the gates, great. If you're not, then you need to look at how you're going to raise the money. I don't know how many gate cards are out there, but if it's not worth the energy of collecting it at $10 a piece, it's not worth collecting it. I mean, I accept that. But I'm not here to argue. I'm here to understand. And so I think you're on solid ground going forward, no matter what you decide on this.
Well, I want to jump in because
Mr. Barrett.
I still a little confused about this situation. We talk about wanting to have control, and when I asked the question regarding how do we control it if we just give it to the FBO and say, you distribute them and you keep track of them, but you tell us when somebody leaves, et cetera, I'm told that, well, then we could cut off the FBO. Is that realistic? Do we do that? Have we ever done that? I'm not cognizant of whether.
No,
That's what I thought. Thank you.
but I think in my world, if you have a new employee come on and you ask for a gate card for them, you buy the gate card, you issue it to them, and note the number just like you would a key to your outside door facilities. And when they leave, you bring back all the cards and keys that you've issued to them, and then you notify or return the card to the manager so he can make the appropriate entry. There will be people on the airport working for some FBOs that are indeed independent contractors that will need to issue gate cards to. But they need to be really independent contractors, not just employees who come and go.
Well, I'm like Steve Taxis. I'm just trying to understand, and the question I'm asking is, if the issue is control, and we don't ever have a hammer, we really don't have control. And people don't. I mean, human nature is they don't always follow the rules. Let's go back to the idea that people are driving when they know they shouldn't be, or at least they're told in what they're given, you're not supposed to do this, and it happens. And that's all I'm asking. If we do it that way, will it work?
Member Golden.
We're getting way off track here.
Yes, we are.
Okay? We're getting way off track. We're getting off track because somehow or other, the concept of access got involved in this. This was to discuss renewals, possible changes to fees associated with gate cards. The minute we start talking access, we're going way off track. Now we're into a policy matter. Let's address the topic at hand, then we can talk access on a later date and do so appropriately with a gate card policy.
I don't disagree with that. I just was trying to understand something that got
Oh, yeah.
brought in.
Understood.
Any public comment on this issue? If you could come up, announce your name, spell your last name, I'd appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Brad Graber. I love it to walk up here and see Mr. Takis' smile. Right? I'm not an attorney. One of the particulars in this gate card is to get it off and get it started. So specifically and personally, in my case, I have a few hangars that I rent out, and periodically some of my folks, either maybe a new person or someone loses their card or left it at home, or the wife's got it, you know the problems. So I have purchased, starting at I think $10, then $15, now $25, several cards, and they have sat on my desk because forever I've been able to just give a card to someone and they could use it, and then they'd bring it back to me, and somebody else needed it, I would do it. You understand what's going on. Now I have several cards that don't work. So there should be, as we get started in this new thing, which I think is pretty good, there should be a time frame here that I can bring, and others that have this same situation can bring your cards in. They were all addressed correctly when I got them, either from Yvonne when it started, or Dirk back when, or who's the kid from Camarillo? Casey, or the last fellow that was here, whatever his name was. So, I mean, they were all numbered. And so every time I've gone back with a card, nobody says, well, heck, I don't even have a record of this. So it would be good to have, at the start, I'll bring you in a bunch of cards, half a dozen, 10, whatever I've got, and I'll, list them out. I already paid $25 a piece for them. I don't want to be charged again, is what I'm saying, at the start. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Graber. Any further discussion on this item? On the fee schedule that has been submitted to us? Hearing none, I would move that I would accept a motion to approve the policy submitted for consideration by Mr. Golden. Is there appetite for that motion?
I'll do it. So moved.
Mr. Val.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Val, seconded by Member Rogers. John, I was going to say. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Can I just get some clarification?
Absolutely.
The written policy doesn't address the $10 renewal fee. Do I understand correctly, the motion that was made and the second and the vote includes removal of the $10? I don't see it on here. I guess the fact that it's not on here indicates that there would not be a $10.
There's a line at the bottom of that first
Right.
paragraph that says there will be no cost to cardholders if they update their
I
information
got
by
you.
July 1st.
I apologize.
Right.
I apologize. Okay, that takes care of it.
And I might note that I clarified that with Mr. Golden, that there will be no cost to any cardholder if they update their information by July 1st. Putting any in there clarifies it's not just the FBOs, it's everybody. Correct?
Correct. So, and a point of reference, just so that we are all clear here, because this was a point of contention in last month's meeting. Read carefully, maybe we should read this to the public.
Oh, yeah.
Can do that?
Yeah, I'll take the liberty to do so,
Okay.
with emphasis on the fact that there will be no proration of these fees. So effective immediately, notice to be provided to all gate holders by March 31st of each year that their gate cards require an annual renewal with updated contact information provided to the airport no later than June 1st of each year. By doing so, the card is kept active. If the cardholder fails to update their information, gate access will be terminated effective July 1st. Reactivation of the card costs $20. Replacement cards cost $25. New issuance cards will cost $25. Fees are not to be prorated. There will be no cost to cardholders if they update their information by July 1st. Cardholders will be required to provide name, phone number, email address, mailing address, hanger and tail number if applicable. And we approve that we're retaining the gate fund for now to use for repairs and/or maintenance of the gates.
And we want to change it to redeeming.
Yeah, okay. So there will be no cost to any card holders if they update their information by July 1st. That's the motion.
Any questions on that? That should make it clear. So all in favor again?
Aye.
Any opposed? None heard? Motion carries. We will move on. The new item F2 for possible action, review and evaluation of resumes submitted in response to job announcement and invitation for resumes, rank applicants, additional steps, authorize authority members and council to make job offer to applicants in ranked order, approval of base contract for modification and use with ranked applicants. Member Harvey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, as we all know, we've been on this process of looking for a permanent person to replace Dirk, who's doing a great job, and I know is anxious for us to keep moving forward on this. We were able to, as I know is noted in here, put out this notice and received 21 resumes. We went through, and the committee, Vice Chairman Val, Member Harris, myself, with assistance of Council Takis, have been meeting and met through and came up with a guideline, if you will, which all of you have seen, that kind of made sure we looked at the job description, looked at the key points we wanted to get from someone as we evaluated these applicants. We came up with four that had actual airport management or some type of aviation experience. And we have gone to an organization called C Virtual, something I've used with my company for a long time, that allows you to do video interviews. So it kind of gives you a nice, better picture than just a resume. And that's been a nice tool. I know I've got several comments from those who've seen it to say, boy, it's a pretty slick, because it just gives you another insight to this person and the individual. We had hoped to have a little more information at this meeting. However, one of our candidates, although through no fault initially of his own, had submitted it. We had video corruption, and that was a problem technology. He did it again, same problem. They're now having him come to their offices, so we have a fourth video that we'll post to all of you. So right now, just so everyone knows, it's posted. All members have access, as well as the public. We're putting on the website. So all this process has been totally, I hope, seen this way, transparent. All the resumes are up. All these will go up as well. So our next steps for our committee, we want to move forward in taking a look at finishing these videos, taking a look at the discussion and our discussion as a committee to identify those that come in for a one-on-one interview with our committee. We'd like to have our council take us and more than likely invite interim manager Dirk to take part in that, so that we can from that interview, go in a little more detail like we'd all want in a job interview for why us, why now? Some of those will be moving. So there's some questions we want to do that we know you would all want. We'll make sure those questions are vetted out to the board like we did before, so you all see it. That when we complete it, it'll be audio recorded, as well as a synopsis provided to everyone, including on the website of that meeting. The goal is to come back at our next board meeting, and we had discussed whether it's the regular one in March or we might try to call one sooner, that would allow us to bring in the candidates to the board to have a recommendation from staff after the review, and that we'd have an opportunity to have them present to the board their interest and why, and for this board to actually, the members who had that opportunity, maybe ask some additional questions if they feel like that we'd miss some. So that's our goal for process, to make sure, again, we're open, transparent in this process, but to do our best to make sure we're getting the right candidate for this position. So as you can see by the proposed motion, the actions we were hoping for, so we're not there on the ranking the candidates yet. We would like, once this board does take action, to be able to direct us to move forward with working on coming up negotiation. Obviously, that would be the next phase. And all of you have seen a base employment agreement that, again, vetted by our council, that we would use to evaluate that negotiation. And that negotiation would be either as an employee of the organization or potentially a contract employee. So that'd be something we would work out with the individual that this was chosen by this board. So at this time, The only motion, I guess, I would say is if we could approve the draft contract as our base document for negotiation, because we're not ready for the other points at this point. So I would move that without, I'm sure there might be discussion, but approve the draft document as a base document. The expectations, the terms may be negotiated.
I would second that motion, Larry. Madam Chair, may I comment?
Please.
Okay, thank you. Larry, you've answered like 95% of the questions I was going to ask about the process here, so I'm really comfortable that you have your arms around this. There is one question, though, that I have that I think, well, maybe two, but one really important. I think I'm going to direct this at Steve because this is a legal issue. You know, I feel confident, Larry, especially after hearing your presentation just now, that yourself and Bradley and Brian have this matter relatively under control. Is there any way, Steve, that when we do these in-person interviews, the entire airport authority members can be present for the interview?
If the entire airport authority is present for the interview, it would need to be done in an open meeting. It would need to be done in a meeting like we have right now. Keep in mind that, as Member Harvey pointed out, everything that we've collected as a committee, we're providing to you. We're not filtering it. To the extent that the committee came up with a grading tool, it's a method for evaluating it. We made it completely transparent so you can look at it and say, well, you know, when I look at that resume, I really think this deserves a different number, and you can create your own. And so the object here is to make sure that we're doing what the open meeting law allows, which is to go out and have a committee to effectively collect the right information for you to have a decision, at the same time get a bunch of that work done. So that we don't have to do it all as a group every meeting. So so the answer to your question is yes, it could be done. It would have to be done in an open meeting. And then the other side is, now that I've worked with Larry and Bradley, who both have this tremendous, they ooze experience when I work with them on this hiring stuff. I would defer to them as to whether it makes sense to have a big group interview or to kind of keep it somewhat limited and then make sure that you guys get to see the results of that interview. Because I've watched the Board of Supervisors interview, and that's just 5 people, and sometimes those get unwieldy, as I'm sure Supervisor Barrett would tell you.
Steve, you've made a really good point. I'll retract my desire to sit in on the interview, since HR is not one of my strong points. But I do have another question. Let's just say that I think the rankings are pretty right, but maybe I saw something that was out of place. Maybe someone who didn't make the top 4 might be in there or should be there for consideration, or that's just my opinion. Sure. I think relatively it looks really good. How do we address that process?
So there are 2 ways we can address it. One is, we already took the initial step of providing you all the resumes, telling you here are the 4 that kind of come out on the grading for the committee, grade them yourself. If you want interviews from anybody else, just let us know. We had a fairly short time period on that because we were trying to see if we could get everything done in time for this meeting. That's not realistic. So my advice to you is, if you think somebody else should be in that top group, I think you just need to communicate it to me or to a member of the committee, and we'll just include them. I mean, the idea is to try and make sure that you have in front of you as a group all the people that you want to seriously consider for the job. So the only thing I would ask is that we have a relatively short time period to do that, because whoever we pick, we're going to have to get them online to do the video interview, and then also go to the next step and consider whether they should be in the personal interview. And one other thing that, the only other thing I think, Larry, when you were giving your summary, was excellent. The only other thing that I don't think we've done yet is check references, which is a very important thing.
Thank you, Steve. And that is, I'm sorry, I did miss that the next step is all the reference checks. So obviously employment background verification, criminal background, we would make sure to go through and do background checks. We'll be using C Virtual, who's agreed to do that, an independent party, as part of the next step process. So we'd want you to know that, yeah, that's another piece besides an interview. There's a small cost to that, but we've been.
One of the things we need to do, and this is critical, and Steve and I know this all too well from professional experience we've had with an individual, we have got to not just look at their references, we have got to call others outside their references who have any association with them in a professional capacity that we can find and start asking some questions. Because let's face it, they're going to give you good references no matter what. They always do. Ask the airport tenants at their airport, ask the associations at their airport, things of that nature. We've got to get some feedback beyond their references from people who are willing to speak candidly, good or bad.
Understand. Good point.
Member Harvey, can I ask, your intent is to bring a select group of candidates before the committee and do personal interviews, and then you intend to bring some of those candidates before the entire board at the next meeting so that we get a chance to ask any questions that we think need to be added to the mix. Do you have an expectation of how many people you're shooting to bring before the entire board, or is that an open number?
At the moment, it's an open number. We've had the first 3 interviews reviewed. We got 1 more to review. We haven't really got into deep discussion yet. I had the opportunity because we're waiting for the 4th, to be fair. So no, I don't have a number. Obviously, it's between 1 and 4. My goal is my goal is always to bring at least 2 candidates, right, for this board to review. But it wouldn't surprise me if it was 2, 3, or 4, depending on the response. Whatever we come up with would be in a report to this board. And just like Steve said, we'd also, as before, if you have somebody you want us to add, that was the intent for you to tell us, because we will. And the same way, when we come back with a recommendation, if you say, tell us out of that 3, we would then make sure we had whatever that individual was there to be part of that process. So we want to be very open in this process. We're trying to make sure everybody's heard in this group. So we're very attuned to that, just so you know that. I think we have a great process group. Again, yeah, Bradley and myself have had many years law, 30 years in this HR and experience background. And Brian, of course, in his aviation and the process and airport, and Linda, who helped get us started, and of course Steve, who's been part of this board as well. I mean, we got a great group that's really helped us, I think, get great insight. And of course, this group who's seen the job description and those things too to help us get that. So I feel pretty confident in that. I hope you do after all this. But believe me, we'll make sure you see everything. That's the goal.
Vice Chair Val.
I had just one question for Steve. So if we took this to a special meeting, how soon could we do that? How much time notice do we have to give?
3 business days time notice. The notice period is 3 business days. It has to be before 9 a.m., 3 full business days before the meeting. So currently, we get our notices out by 9 a.m. on Friday for a Wednesday night meeting. Okay. And so if we want to do a special meeting, we could do that. One thing that would be helpful, Member Harvey, if you could give us an idea of what should be a reasonable deadline for any of the other members to add anybody to the list at this point, given that we still need to collect a video interview. I mean, no, yeah.
Yeah, let's see, when does this meeting end? That would be ideal. 7:35? But honestly, if you could get it if you get it by Friday noon at least, I think that gives an opportunity to get that person engaged in the process. That would be helpful.
Thinking tomorrow.
Perfect, thank you.
If I can go there.
Okay, so do you want to restate your motion?
No, there's a motion and a second.
The motion and a second, okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Any public comment? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. None heard? Motion carries. For possible action, manager requests guidance on the issues of individuals performing work for hire as APs without approved FBO status and individuals who use hangars as residences. Mr. Zatilla.
Okay, I wanted to bring this issue out just because it needs to come out in the open, because it's one of these things that you get complaints about, but no action is ever taken. And frankly, I'm kind of at a loss as to how to proceed on something like this. I have reports of both of these issues, and I don't want to be a cop out there and go banging on doors and what are you doing? And, it's a little bit of an awkward situation for me. And I think for our future manager, that's the main reason I wanted to bring it up now, so that we can get some clarity on how to deal with this kind of issue. The thing with the A&Ps, we've had, this going on for many, many years. And in representing the airport, it's my job to protect the interests of the people who are doing legitimate business on the airport and pay their fees and have insurance and have all the business license and everything that goes along with it, and they're being undercut by other people. So the question is, with both of these, how do I deal with this?
Maybe I could just add to it a bit. I did outline in my briefing memo what the Title 19 requirements are, and if you're going to operate as an FBO in the field, you need to have an FBO license. You either need to be employed by a Class 1 FBO, so you're doing it under a Class 1 FBO, or you have to have a Class 2 FBO license from us. A Class 2 FBO is somebody who's doing an aviation business and they don't have a direct lease with us, they're renting space from someone else. And so if there are people operating that don't fit into that category, that's where we need to focus. My initial advice to the airport manager is, we get complaints all the time. This is a Peyton place. We get complaints about all kinds of things all the time. And what we need to do is, when we get the complaint, we need to obtain the evidence to support it. And so when he gets a complaint, he should turn around and ask the person complaining, okay, help me get the evidence to support this, because the bare complaint isn't good enough. And so what was relayed to me is there were two individuals relayed to me that were operating as A&Ps outside of an FBO license. One was Jess Edwards, who I talked to today. He works for Shade Tree Aviation. He's operating under Shade Tree Aviation. So I don't know how long that's been going on, but that's something that is easy enough for Dirk to verify and determine whether that's accurate. The other one was Steve Posick, which is a bit troubling because the complaint came from Carson Aviation. The people who he sold his business to, he's apparently come back to the airport and picked up some of his old clients and is operating or doing repairs. And this is a complaint. I'm not telling you that this is fact. This is the complaint that came from Carson Aviation. Again, I think that Dirk's role should be to go out, try and ascertain whether there's evidence of that taking place. And if so, notify me. I will send a letter or contact Steve Posick if that's true and ask him not to do it. He knows what the rules are. He should. And those are the only two people that I'm aware of that we have had specific complaints on A&Ps. But yeah, we need to take it seriously. That's the first part of the agenda item. You're going to talk about the second one?
Shall we finish talking about that first?
Yep, sure.
So we don't muddle them together? Vice Chairman?
Okay, so on both of those people, I personally received complaints from other FBOs about those activities. The one with Jess Edwards was brought up in the context of one of the accidents that we had in the previous 2 weeks. So along with the accident that happened, I think yesterday, the day before in Minden, there have now been 5 in the past 2 weeks between our two airports. And Jess paid me a visit and was quite upset and angry, and I explained to him in the same terms that Dirk had just mentioned, that it's not fair to the existing FBO licensees who went through the process, filled out the paperwork, got the insurance, named the airport as an additional insured for their activities so that there's no liability on the airport side for anything that's happening. It's not fair to those people who went through this process. So he did go, he came and visited me yesterday and followed up and said that he had gotten together with Shade Tree and established a relationship with them so that he is now insured and legal and all that. That brings up an issue which isn't really talked about on this, and I'm not quite sure how Title 19 talks about this, but fixed base operators are fixed. What about mobile operators that are doing work in other people's hangars? There was a tenant, a hangar tenant to me today that came up to me and said, hey, we're owners of our aircraft is in our hangar, we're doing maintenance, but we hired this other guy to come in and help us out. Is he in trouble? Are we in trouble? And I said, it was my opinion that I didn't think so, since you weren't in the business of running around the airport soliciting maintenance activities and using your hangar as a fixed base of operation for doing that maintenance activity without having a license. I said, it's your airplane, you know, you chose to hire that person, that's fine. But if the person that you hired is consistently going around the airport from hangar to hangar to hangar to hangar to hangar and operating as an FBO and not having a license, I said that I think would be where I would draw the line as somebody who's doing behavior that's not acceptable. In the second case with Steve Posick, the owners of Carson Aviation came to me 2 months ago and demanded that we get heard that night on the meeting, and I said that's not possible. You're not on the agenda. Like, go get yourself put on the agenda to address this issue. But they made the accusation, and I, from personal history with him, he's made the same representation to me, that for a fee, he would be willing to sign off on any of the stuff that we were doing. I know for a fact that both myself and the owners of Carson Services have a non-compete agreement, so any activity that he's doing for hire in relation to maintenance anywhere in the state of Nevada is a violation of our contract that we have. So he shouldn't be operating here, nor Minden, or anywhere else. That does not have anything to do with the airport, other than the fact that if he is doing these activities for hire and there's no FBO license, then we need to get involved. But I know that they've had, and they expressed a displeasure that they were having business cannibalized. And to what Dirk said about us protecting our existing FBO licensees who actually went through the process, we should be on the side of the FBOs rather than allowing this kind of activity to go on unchecked without investigating what's happening.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with everything you just said on both issues. On the first issue, in terms of hiring someone to work in your hangar, I think we've recognized for a long time we have a lot of unusual aircraft that require specialized people that may not be on the field. For example, we have a gentleman who's restoring a Messerschmitt 109. I think finding a mechanic who can work on one of those is probably a worldwide search, not even a airport-wide search. And so we do have that from time to time. We also have people that have maybe some specialized Grumman aircraft, things like that, that require people that have a certain amount of expertise on those aircraft. Now, that being the case, I agree with your observation. They need to be people who are not regularly on the airport doing the rounds and fixing things, and that's where the rub is, and that's where we run into an issue. And then as to your second point, well, I think you said it pretty succinctly.
Do you have people in the instance of where you've been told, Vice Chair Val, do you have people who have come to you with proof that that kind of work is actually being done by that individual?
In which case?
Mr. Posick.
I don't have any evidence or anything like that. I just have verbal representation from the owners of Carson Services that that this activity was going on. Can someone clarify, I guess does the Cubics hangar lease allow for maintenance operations over there, or is it storage only? By my memory, I thought it was storage only, so if they are doing maintenance activity for hire over there may be a lease issue in terms of compliance.
I'll look that up. I remembered one other comment I wanted to make, though, but to the extent there is some violation of a non-compete clause, that would be a civil matter between the two entities. That would not be an airport matter. I mean, that's still a serious matter, but that wouldn't be our airport engagement. But I'll look up the Cubics lease real quick and let you know.
Yes, Member Golden.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment on this. I'm a little disturbed about this, Dirk, not because of you, but because of everyone who sat in your seat. to the members of this airport authority, we already have rules and regulations in place. What's going on is our staff isn't enforcing it. And this has been historical. And Dirk has alluded to this, that this is not new. Let me address two issues here. One's very simple. People cannot live in their hangars. We had a situation when I was on the board of directors at the airport in Truckee many years ago. Gentleman was living in his hangar. His family hadn't heard from him for months. We finally went into his hangar, and there was a corpse.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, we are lucky at that airport that we were not sued to holy high hell by the family. You cannot have people living in their hangars. I know some of the hangars have living quarters, and if they're going to spend a night there, I see no harm, no foul. But you can't have people establishing permanent residence in their hangars. That goes against our rules and regs, okay? It's a showstopper right there. And as for Title 19, not only are the FBOs that are adhering to that paying insurance and following the rules and regs, they also are paying rent to the airport. They also occupy a premises that has certain parameters and criteria outlined in Title 19, where other individuals may be performing maintenance services on the airport, and they're circumventing Title 19 because they don't have the premises, they don't have the insurance, they're not paying rent to the airport. And this is a quandary that when you ask what should be done, Dirk, let me be candid. Enforce the rules. The rules are in place for a reason. I don't want to use names, and I'm not going to. There is an individual on this airport, well-known, that has tried to solicit customers from a premises that my company owns right near Mr. Graber's hangar. And that individual will often drive their vehicle over to our premises, wait for aircraft owners to pull up, and then try to solicit them for business. When we tried to stop it, one of your predecessors got very defensive over it and said that there was nothing the airport could do about it. Well, I'm sorry, there is something the airport can do about it. And the airport should be, through staff, not this airport authority, enforcing the rules and regulations that are on the books.
Mr.
Can I
Zatella?
take a turn here real quick? Because I do have a couple of questions now. One specific question about Jess Edwards. Is Shade Tree a Class 1 repair station?
Yes.
And so repairs can be done in there. But does that mean that the work that's being done by Jess Edwards, does it have to be brought to that facility? Or is he allowed to roam around the airport doing work in people's hangars?
I have to give some thought to that. I guess it depends on the kind of work that's being done. But if it lends itself to being done in the Shade Tree hangar, that's where it should be done. I think the more inclusive way to look at it is any work that's being done, whether it's being done in the Shade Tree hangar or in a hangar, the owner's hangar, would still have to be run through Shade Tree. So it's still going to have to go through their books, whether it's done there or not. I mean, I've seen other mechanic shops on the airport, on this airport and other airports, go out on the ramp to fix things because that's where the aircraft is. And certainly that's okay. The farther question of whether it can be done in the owner's hangar, but through Shade Tree is, let me give some thought to that. Let me answer your question too, Member Vowell. The Cubics lease is essentially a full FBO lease. It includes sales of new and used aircraft, sale of aircraft parts, retail and wholesale, radio and electronic equipment, flight operations, rental and charter, flight training, maintenance, repair, and overhaul of all types of aircraft engines, instruments, and radio gear, line service, including fueling, although I don't believe it has the right to have a fuel tank, so I guess I don't know how they would do that technically, and aircraft storage. That's what they're authorized to do. Historically, it's been storage. When Cubics had it, they only used it for storage. And I think, unless something's changed, I think it's still being used primarily for storage. I'm not aware of any maintenance obligations or maintenance operations going on there. But then again, I'm not out there looking at it every day, so don't know. I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt. Back to the thing on living in hangars. Member Golden, you're exactly right. It's not permitted by Title 19. It's not permitted by the zoning. It's not permitted by the FAA. If somebody is using their hangar as their primary residence, they're in violation of all of those. And to the extent we have evidence that that's occurring, that's something that we have to address right away. So, I mean, again, if somebody provides me the evidence, I'm more than happy to be the enforcement and to go remedy it. But we need to have evidence of that.
Yeah, Dirk, you asked what you should do. I'll tell you what you should do. For example, with Mr. Edwards, let's see his W-2 from Shade Tree. Let's see his paycheck stub from Shade Tree. Let's see what
1099.
1099 from Shade Tree. My guess is none of these things exist. And let's see the insurance, okay? There's a litany of different criteria, and you can ask for it. It's acceptable that you do so, and we should be getting those things since he claims to be legal. Let's get them. That's all you need to do.
I think that's appropriate. Any other comments? Mr. Rogers.
I'd just like to add that from my interpretation of Title 19, in addition to everything that's been set up here being correct, there's also a well-defined process by which grievances are brought forth. You know, a person who makes a complaint has to do it publicly, sign it, provide evidence, then that's delivered to the airport authority for action if needed. So I think that in addition to the allowable activities being well-defined in Title 19, the process by which complaints are brought forth is also well-defined, and we can feel free to use those and should be using those.
Mr. Barrett.
I just want to say we've gone down this road before, and you all know my position from the standpoint of the city, which is that we have to follow Title 19, so I agree with everything that's been said.
Mr. Val.
One question on the FBO thing. If a fixed base operator is doing some sort of maintenance, let's say there's a disabled airplane or something, what is the extent of the coverage on the insurance? Is the airport on the hook for activity that occurs, let's say, on the approach to the runway because that's where the airplane is disabled, or does that FBO's insurance have to cover them? My insurance as an FBO operator, I don't think it says that I'm covered on the entire airport. It says I'm covered on my premise.
That's something I'll have to look at. I don't know the answer to that.
Do you know what we require in terms of what kind of coverage needs to be in place? I mean, I think my policy covers my premise, but we specifically had to name the airport as an additional insured. But does that mean the entire airport property and all that, or just my property as it relates to the airport?
You know, and it's both the leases and Title 19 say you have to name the both the airport authority and Carson City as additional insureds. Carson City is the underlying landowner, and the Carson City Airport Authority as the airport operator. I need to look closer.
But it's the property that's covered and not the entity?
I think it's the actions that are covered. Well,
okay.
I think Member Golden probably has more information on this.
Because it kind of covers the question, if we do have an FBO that has a legitimate purpose, whether it's yours or his or anybody else's that are running around, I don't think 19 really says that they're limited to only doing work inside their location. And then there's this issue of, what if they're out there on the runway and they get hit by another airplane or something like that? Who's on the hook for that?
Member Golden.
Member Vowell, there's coverage specifically that repair stations should have called aircraft movement. And aircraft movement specifically covers removal, extraction, and actual movement of aircraft. Exactly.
Okay.
And that means if we're involved, we're covered. It could be we're extracting an aircraft from the runway environment, from a taxiway, or we could just be moving that aircraft from the ramp into a hangar, or moving it out of a hangar. But aircraft movement is the coverage, and anyone who's operating in that line of work, they should have aircraft movement coverage.
Okay.
I'll follow up on that.
Go ahead. Okay. So at this point, what we're going to do is say, as long as a complaint is brought to Mr. Zatilla, and that there is the allegation, and we can go check to make sure that a person is acting under the auspices of an FBO, you should be requesting those documents to show that they are indeed attached to and working under the auspices of that FBO. And that in the instance of somebody alleging that a transient person that is not supposedly attached to an FBO, we need that complaint to be accompanied by dates and times and visual or written documentation. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Takis? Okay. So I would entertain a motion that we, sorry. Public comment, Mr. Leitch. Please come and say your name, spell your name for the record.
I still have a comment on transient issue.
Oh, okay. And we are going to restrict comments to 3 minutes, so please use brevity. Thank you.
My name is Eric Leitch, spelled Laetsch. I think we have fallen into a big mess with well-intentioned. Because if I understand the way these things are supposed to be done, Mr. Golden, who has given you a great deal of useful guidance, I believe is an owner or a principal in an FBO, which has in the past, may now presently, and certainly in the future, has the opportunity to do maintenance. And therefore, I believe that Mr. Golden should have recused himself before he participated in this discussion. I think as a result, if I understand how laws like this are supposed to be done, despite the very valuable information that he's provided, not only should Mr. Golden not vote, I think by participating, he has totally contaminated this discussion.
Mr. Takis?
I have in mind as a point of reference, on the few times that I've been to the Board of Supervisors, when something to do with the airport has come up, under those circumstances, the mayor routinely stands up and excuses himself, recuses him, I think is the word. And so I'm no expert on this, but I think, again, I've started out by saying this is a mess. It's unfortunate that it started down this path and got to this point, because I don't know how you can properly go forward. Sir.
We've had this issue before, and I've talked to the Ethics Commission on numerous occasions about it. We have almost a built-in conflict of interest on our airport authority because the law requires that 2 of the members be FBOs. And so the guidance that we've gotten is if the matter we're discussing is specifically about that FBO, which I don't recognize this matter to be, then they must disclose and recuse. But if it's not specifically about business they're conducting or directly directed at trying to change their business, then I don't think they're required to abstain and disclose. And that's because of the hybrid nature of the board that's built into this by virtue of the law.
I respectfully disagree. Mr. Golden is a potential competitor of these people that are being discussed.
Okay,
and again, I recognize the value of the contribution. I'm saying we have a mess.
And I understand what you're saying, and that's the difficulty with the issue. But that argument, if you use that argument, the FBO members of this airport authority would never be able to vote on anything because everything will affect their business, everything on the airport, arguably. And so it's not an easy issue. I'm not telling you it's black and white.
I started out with the word mess.
But but I don't think he's obligated to recuse him. Now, if the discussion was he's doing business, he's taking business from me, that might be different, and I didn't hear that statement, though.
All right. Going on.
You have about a minute and a half.
Excuse me, I think there's two topics there.
Sorry, I used up your time, sorry.
Go ahead.
No. I have a hangar I own and two I rent. I've been on this airport for about 20 years. In my hangar or hangars, I work on my aircraft. I also have a toilet. And occasionally I have to call a plumber. It is routine in my world to have and to want to have, to invite people to come into my hangar to fix my toilet and work on or help me work on my airplanes. That can be somebody like Rick from Rag Arrow in Porterville, who's a specialist in Cessna 180s. It can be somebody from Aviation Classics who comes down and does the biennial transponder calibration. I might invite our chairwoman to come on over and help me work on my New Zealand when it gets here, and then we go for a flight. I might pay you $20 for your help. Okay, so whether I have somebody from out of the state or out of the city or from down the row in my airport, I believe I have the right to have someone come and work on my aircraft and pay them. And I am concerned when this authority restricts that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harvey.
I appreciate the conversation, but I believe that we've given proper direction to the airport manager. I am not sure that I understand why we would need to vote on this issue.
Oh, you got it?
Mr. Val.
This issue is in two parts. I wish there were two separate items. The first item, I stated before, I don't think we have any problem with, somebody who's an occasional this or that, but when you've got somebody who's floating around the airport all over the place who should be licensed as an FBO and is flagrantly breaking the rules, that is a problem. On the second issue, the individual whose hangar is residence, there's actually two issues here as far as I'm concerned. One is people who have built-in residences, and the other transient homeless people that are camping out in between some of the rows of the hangars and stuff like that. I've personally witnessed that happening. I've gotten the sheriffs involved. We've gone out there and looked for them. I know that there's still a case between the first and second row on the west side where there's some sort of homeless encampment going on in between the rows, and that hasn't been dealt with yet. So in regards to providing direction on that one, I would like to see us come up with a policy that says, obviously you can't live on the airport if you don't live there, but for vagrants and stuff like that, we need either the maintenance people or the responsible FBO or somebody. It needs to be clear. Somebody needs to go deal with that before it becomes a problem. We have a person right now who comes and goes several times a day and is living somewhere over there in those rows. I've been hesitant to confront the person, mostly because I don't want to get stabbed or whatever might happen. I don't think that the person's violent, but you never know. I've lived in San Francisco and everybody on the street's violent. So I assume otherwise until proven that that's not the case. We do need to, I think, have some sort of action on that particular item in regards to vagrancy. This is written a little bit kind of vaguely, so I don't think it's making much differentiation between somebody who's actually living in a fixed hangar with a plumbing and a bed and all that kind of stuff versus somebody who dragged in a shopping cart with some cardboard and is camped out over there.
It sounds like if they're living next to a hangar, that's close enough for our notice language. So what action are you proposing?
One of the things I might mention is when I heard about the vagrant issue, I went over and walked every one of those aisles between the T hangars, and I found no...
I'll take your word, it's still there.
Well, I went over there, and as far as I could see, there was some trash and so forth in between them, but there was nothing that looked like someone had actually set up a camp in there at the time I walked it.
Okay. It comes through around sunset.
Okay, Mr. Zatello, do you have comment on that?
I did the same thing. I walked through there, but I only did it once, and it was a month and a half or so ago. It's been a while. It's not something I do on a routine basis. We can. The porta-ports are an issue because they have these little zigzag spaces in between, and it's really easy to hide in. And we can make that a routine thing where we check on it, at least every few days, because it only takes a few minutes to go through there. The issue really that I was bringing out was I can only present it as a rumor at this point. I don't have any facts to back it up, but I have a report of at least one individual who has been living in a hangar for quite a long time, and I was told that this person even applied for his driver's license and stuff using that as an address and got turned down when they found out that you can't live at the airport. But again, I don't have anything to back that up, but that's the issue that I bring. And how do you enforce that? Do I have a right to go? Do I call for an inspection of the hangar? I don't know how you prove something like that. It's a little awkward.
My suggestion would be that we send a letter through our attorney to the owner of the hangar, asking them to comply with Title 19 and provide assurance that there is no one living there.
Back to your evidence, if you do find things that list that as a primary residence, like if you said the driver's license didn't work because they wouldn't accept it, but if there's some other listing that shows that as their residence, that should be enough for me to take that next step with them, and I'm happy to do that.
So as long as we have visual contact with the hangar and see that there is something that looks askew, if we report that to you, then you can write a letter to them.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but he brought up another question, and I'll direct that to you. I don't know who owns many of those hangars. All I know is who is the head of like a condominium group, and we have reports of who is in the hangars, but many of those are renters. I don't know who owns the hangars. How do we find that out?
All the hangar ownership information is available on the assessor's public webpage. All you got to do is look at the APN numbers, and they list all the owners, the assessed owners. And so that data is easy for us to identify.
Okay, because we should have that.
And I can help you do that.
We should have that available, because right now I don't have it, at hand.
I'll get you the web address. It's real easy. And so at this point, I don't know that any additional action is required on this item. I'm not hearing any, so.
Mr. Rogers.
Steve, I'd just like to ask if I am reading Title 19 correctly, and I'm going back to Mr. Leitch's public comments. I think there's a paragraph in Title 19 that specifically addresses or allows for owners or renters and hangars to get work done on their airplanes in their hangar. I'm not exactly sure which paragraph it is. I can't. Since I don't have a copy of Title 19 right in front of me, so I think there is a provision in there that allows for individuals to bring in a friend, a helpmate, and and perform work on their airplanes in their hangars. And I don't think it specifically disallows them from paying them a few bucks either. Do you think I'm right on that?
I'd have to look at Title 19, but I can tell you right now, each of the leases say that the owner of the hangar may work on their own aircraft in the hangar. And so they certainly have that right. The right to hire other people to come in, that becomes a little bit more gray. And I'll have to go back and look at Title 19 and see if it directly addressed that, because off the top of my head, I just don't remember.
Okay, at this point in time,
We got two public.
Oh, absolutely.
I just looked it up.
I was going to take.
Eric Leitch again. I believe the wording is that the lessee may have maintenance performed in the hangar. I don't believe it's explicit to the owner doing the maintenance themselves. That would be kind of ridiculous.
Evening. Bill Hartman, Hartman. Little update on the Cubics hangar. It's not. It is now the Gonai Aviation hangar. And Steve, you know that.
You need to put a new sign up because we're always going to call it that.
I took the old signs down. We haven't remade them to put them back up again. Myself, George Cleary, and Steve Lewis purchased the hangar back in about June, something such as that. We're using it. We have all the rights that Steve mentioned that Cubics had. We have also, and we still use it primarily for storage. And as far as maintenance in the hangar, tenants and hangar owners are maintaining their own airplanes in the hangar. So that's where we are right now. So Gonai Aviation Hangar.
We appreciate that, Mr. Hartman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any question?
Is Steve Posick affiliated with you guys? Is he doing maintenance for you in the hangar?
No, he is not. He's not affiliated with us. I have witnessed him doing maintenance elsewhere, but not in our hangar. Pardon me?
Not under your umbrella, not under your auspices?
No, not under our auspices at all. Not under Gonai Aviation, no. Mm-mm. No.
Thank you for that. I'd like to take, is there any further public comment at this point? I'd like to take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back here at 11:45. All right, thank you all for that break, and we will get started again. It is 7:45. Moving on to the next item, item F4, for possible action, discussion and approval of direction to consultant and engineer regarding FAA AIP 31 master plan. Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Brian Fitzgerald with Atkins, airport engineer. And yes, this is my real voice for the week. The airport master plan, we all know, is currently undergoing. They've been gathering tremendous amounts of data to do our presentations for our meeting next week on Tuesday for both the Planning Advisory Committee and the public open house for their input. Essentially, what they've been dealing with is on-site facilities, aircraft, based aircraft, forecasts based upon those numbers, and other generalized items of existing and proposed features of the airport that have already been identified through like the ACIP process. So in terms of these meetings, there's going to be lots of exhibits, lots of data to share with everybody, and the gist of that is a little bit beyond my comprehension at this point because it hasn't really been shared with me at this point. Our subcontractor, Kaufman, who's been preparing all this information, should have be sending us that information by tomorrow, and it will also go live on the website that they had provided for the master plan, and we'll also link that over to the airport's website so that anybody who wants to look at the information that will be provided can do so prior to, and then they can go to the open house in the evening at 5 p.m. at the terminal building and witness it firsthand, or they can provide comments through the website as well for the public. In terms of the Planning Advisory Committee, there will be similar members that had met on the first meeting in December. And we'll go through more of a discussion during that time as well with those members from the information that they present, and also the direction that the Planning Advisory Committee seems would be necessary for the airport going forward. But with that, when next board meeting comes in April, I'll have a lot more information as to what has been gathered and what was discussed and how we'd be able to move forward. So at this point, just preparing for a large meeting on Tuesday. Any questions on that?
Any questions of Mr. Fitzgerald?
Yeah,
Mr. Barrett?
I have a couple, and I already know most of this, but I want to get my head around it. This is a full master plan review. That's why you have a consultant, correct?
Yes, it is a full review, and the consultant is a part of it for two reasons. One, they do this solely. This is their primary profession. And second, they did the previous one in 2001, so they do have a little bit of history with the airport, and it seemed appropriate to involve them as well. But Atkins is being a part of it, not just looking over the top, but we will have other active involvements, but that's later down the road as well.
So that was their last full review, right, of 2001?
Yes, correct. For this airport,
So
2001.
16
years.
right?
And that did provide a very good document for us to move through those 16 years. But everything in that document has been done or has been addressed in somehow, and so that's why we're having the new one, so we have our future direction.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions, Mr. Fitzgerald?
When is that going to be done?
Mr. Val?
When is that going to be done? When is the master plan review and all that stuff going to be final?
The target date is to submit to the FAA the final report in December. Everything to this point shows that we can accomplish that, unless something major changes after discovery in the next couple of months, which is highly unlikely. Then it could possibly get pushed back a couple more months.
What happens after that? Do they approve it or accept it or anything, or it just goes to them and that's it? That's the end of the process?
They do their review as well. They do a continuing review of the drafts prior to, and then when the final goes out, if they have no additional comments, they do accept the master plan as the document to help guide the airport forward. I'm sorry, and one thing to add, they also do have to approve of the forecast activity on the based aircraft and how we're projecting out the next 20 years. That is a separate item that will be done earlier on. And once the forecast is approved, that really does help the document, be positive in their eyes to be easily approved at the end of the process.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Takis, do you have any comments on that?
I would just add a couple of things. The FAA also approves the funding for this project, so when we get done with it, when they approve the final funding, that also is part of their approval of the master plan. In addition, the FAA approves the airport layout plan. Some of the output from the master plan goes into the airport layout plan. So there's a couple of different levels on which the FAA does approve it, and that's what we expect.
So this approval that comes from them, does that come with a check at the end to pay for all of it, or were we already granted funds up front to do it?
We've already got the grant, and we're currently drawing down the funds. It ends when we close out the grant, get the final payment.
That brings to mind the question of what are the feds looking for, 20-year master plans? So this one was 16 or 17, but do they have a time frame involved?
It varies on the complexity of the airport and what facilities are existing and how the forecast goes. If we're going to be seeing a massive growth here, then maybe it's only a 10-year plan. If we're going to see a slight increase over even 20 years, then it may be a 20-year plan. It just all dependent upon what is determined. And I think we went a little long on our previous master plan. We may have needed to put it a couple years prior so that it kind of dovetails in on the end of that previous one, but we're still not out of the realm of we're so far behind that we're starting from scratch.
I should add, the FAA, in some of our meetings with them, told us for our airport they'd like to see a 10-year plan. We did do an update to the plan. In fact, Atkins did the update at an intermediate stage. So 2001 wasn't really the last master plan. It was updated at some point, and I don't know what the date of that was. I think it might have been 2009 or something like that, but we're now at the end of anybody's view of 10 years, and that's
But those
why
updates aren't looked upon as a full review, are they?
they're not, but it was funded by the FAA, and the FAA did take the output from it.
Any other questions of Mr. Fitzgerald or Mr. Takis? Okay, thank you for your report. I don't think there's any motion that needs to go with that. They're just going to continue to update us over time. So we'll move forward with the airport engineer's report.
Back again. The only item I have at this point, since we've already talked about the master plan, is the upcoming taxiway rehabilitation project to include essentially all the taxiway surfaces on the airport to be crack sealed, seal coated, and restriped. That project is scheduled at this point to go out to bid in early April, with the bid opening towards the end of April, to be able to be heard by the board in May to accept the bids and to notice to the potential low bidder for that project, and then to submit an application to the FAA for a grant. In the meantime, it was brought to my attention and suggestions to reduce the overall closure time of the airport, to have work done at night, and that will be the intention of this project, to have the vast majority of this work done at night so as to not inconvenience the community in general by having only day work and lots of closure at that time. I do have to stress, though, that there will be some closure, mostly associated with work done near the runway itself, and then there will be detours around other areas when we do have to have a part of a taxiway closed. But it is my intention to support the recommendations and to minimize the overall impact to the airport during that time.
Mr. Val.
I noticed in some older pictures and images of the airport from 10, 15 years ago that we used to have the Unicom frequency and the airport name painted on the taxiway. Is that in scope for restriping and all that kind of stuff on the taxiways? Because it disappeared a few years ago, the last time it was resurfaced, and it never came back on.
That is correct. Go ahead, Dirk.
It's in my report.
We can go ahead and wait for your report to get that answered.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I do have an answer.
Thanks.
I do agree with you that it was there at one point. It would be nice to have. I don't know if it's an FAA eligible item like the compass rose as well. I believe it has to be funded by the airport itself to be painted, striped, whatever. We can include that into the project. However, it would be listed as an ineligible item, and then the airport would have to pay for whatever that line item is during the course of the project.
We'll cover this when we get to the manager's report, because that's kind of a two-edged sword here. So if that's all you have,
That's it, unless there's other questions.
we will move on to the airport manager's report and get the answer. Mr. Zatilla.
Okay, thanks. I got a few items to cover tonight. First, January 4th, we sent a notice of default to Carson Aviation Adventures for their lease agreement, and that was completed, and their lease was terminated and effective January 19th, and Carson Aviation Adventures reverts to a Class 2 FBO since they're still in operation out of the El Aero building. On January 8th, Mr. Province and I, our maintenance guy, met with an NV Energy representative for an energy audit regarding electric, and he informed us that whenever we make changes and reduce the wattage of lighting, that we're eligible for a one-time incentive payout. And the reason this is important to us is one of the projects we want to try and accomplish is to move about 10 of the LED fixtures from the north apron that are not being used and replace the ones on the south apron with those LED fixtures. And that rebate could quite possibly cover almost the entire cost of doing that. And it would cut our energy use there by about 2/3. So that's something good to look forward to if we can get that worked out. Next, on February 1st, we activated 2 trap cameras on the airport. One is at the runway 9 threshold, one's at the runway 27 threshold. The purpose of this is so that we can get a quite accurate count of aircraft operations at the airport, because in the past, everything has been estimates as far as I can tell, and this will give us some real accurate numbers that we can use. So we're going to do a monthly count of these things. We take the card out of the camera and go through and just, get some actual real documentation. It'll give us an idea of the types of aircraft and the numbers of operations. So let's see, next as of February 6th, we started using Preferred Networks, Inc. for our internet provider, and Nextiva for VoIP phones. And the cost of this are $70 and $90 a month, respectively. AT&T and Verizon are canceled. This is going to save us going forward about $520 a month. So that's a little over $6,000 in our pockets going forward. And I want to thank John Mays for helping make this possible with the internet service that he's arranged out there. So that was a big bonus for us to bring in. Next, some more unpleasantness. On February 1st, we had a gear up landing at about 11:50 a.m. and no injuries involved. The runway was reopened after an hour. Friday, February 9th, a Kit Fox with 2 aboard had an injury accident. Saturday, February 10th, a Carbon Cub had an incident with the left main gear failure. No injuries in that accident. Sunday, February 11th, another Kit Fox had an incident with no injuries reported. On some of those, we had that weekend, we had some really severe crosswinds going on that kind of account for it, but it was just, I don't remember ever seeing a rash of accidents like this so close together. It's not in my report, but John Mays had us put out a note to all the gate card holders that he's going to do a little get-together tomorrow night and try and get people to talk about the issue and help people think through their flight plans, because some of this stuff should have been preventable with a little better forethought of, should I be flying today? And let's see next. I've been working on creating an email list of gate card holders, which goes along with what we did tonight. It's pretty good. I probably have 20 or 30 that keep getting bounced back, and some people that don't have emails at all. So it's taking a little time trying to work through that stuff, but hopefully we'll get to a point where we have contact with everybody with a gate card so we can finish streamlining this whole system, and also to give the manager a way to communicate, information to people that are actually using the airport, because we really haven't had a good way to do that in the past. Let's see next. I need to be getting together with our treasurer and Cohen & Company to start drafting the budget for next year. So that's another thing that's on our agenda to start working on. And I don't know, we haven't set a date yet, but sometime in the next couple of weeks I think we'll be getting together on that. And on the item of the runway markings, yes, those markings were there in the past. I don't know about the part that said, Carson City and the Unicom number, but the compass rose I know was done by volunteers, and we have the Reno chapter of the 99s has just submitted an offer to us to repaint all that stuff for us. We have to supply the paint, but they will supply all of the labor that's needed and redo all that stuff for us. So that's something we can take care of and not have to worry about the FAA thing. And so it should be a non-issue.
Just to add to that, the last meeting of the Reno Area 99s, I brought that up to them. Oh, sorry. I brought that up to, hello? Wrong one. I brought that up to the chapter, asked them if they would be interested in doing it, and they said yes. We won't be able to do it, of course, until after the runway and the taxiways are all sealed, but that is on their radar, and they'll provide the labor and the layout and all that sort of thing, and what the airport has to do is provide the paint, the materials.
Who's going to survey it?
We have people that we've worked with in the past, and if those people aren't available, we'll find somebody.
Okay.
Yeah. But we've been very lucky to have people donate their time and so forth in the past, and we're hoping to go forward with that as well.
A shameless plug for the airport engineer. If there isn't anybody available that you can find, Atkins does have a survey staff as well that could assist with that. We would look into it further if that's the case.
Thank you.
Yep.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Okay. Last item is I set a date of June the 9th for the airport open house, and I secured a permit for the banner to be hung the week starting May 28th. I hope that we will go forward with the open houses. I know there's been a lot of kind of negative comments about it recently, some bad planning, didn't come off well before, but I think it's an important event for us to have to bring the community in as much as possible and get them involved in the airport. So hopefully we can get our new manager on board with it and everybody here as well. I'd like to see that go forward, and that's the end of my report.
And what was the date you said?
June the 9th. I chose that date because apparently that's the weekend prior to the Father's Day weekend, which was our traditional day for doing that, and there apparently was a conflict. They have some big bicycle event that they've scheduled now every year on that weekend, so didn't make much sense to fight with that, so I pushed us up a week.
If I can just ask, is that locked in, that date that you've chosen?
No.
And-
Well, the date that's locked in is the date for the banner to hang.
Okay. The only reason I mentioned it is the city manager and the mayor came to me just the other day and said that there is going to be a Reno Carson City Navy Week, kind of like Fleet Week down in the Bay Area. And it's part of the Navy's outreach program, and I think it's the last week of June. But they indicated there's a possibility we could get F-18s on static display if we're doing it in conjunction with that. And I apologize, I should have let you know as soon as I heard this, but it's something that I think we should investigate, because if that's real, that might bring some really cool stuff to the Carson Airport.
The date is not cast in stone. Like I said, the only date that we're locked in is the banner over Carson Street, but that, we just put whatever date we want on there. You know, notifying it a couple of weeks early is fine. So yeah, if that comes about, I think that'd be great.
I'll follow up on that tomorrow, because that would be pretty cool, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next is the legal counsel's report.
Okay, I'm going to be really brief. I did include in my briefing some information on accident and incident reporting, you know, given the, you know, I think the anomaly is the 3 tailwheel aircraft, you know, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Admittedly, there were high winds. I'm not a tailwheel guy. I do recognize that tailwheel aircraft are a little bit touchier to land. You really got to stick the tail or whatever. And I was thankful to see that all 3 pilots walked away without any serious injury. Well,
One's in a full body cast.
okay, so there's there was an instructor, I guess, in the first one.
Yep.
And that's news to me, but I understand that he had injured his back, so what I did in my briefing was give you a little bit of background. I mean, I think that maybe we should develop a protocol, and I'm just throwing this out here as an idea. I'm not asking for any action. It's not an action item. But we should have a protocol for if there's an accident, we want everyone to, number one, call 911 and activate emergency services. Get the professionals on the scene to take care of the health care, because what we really need is our priority should always be the people in the airplanes, not the airplane. Once you crash an airplane, you don't own it anymore. The insurance company does. Who cares? It's really the people inside. And so number one is you call 911, and number 2 should be to call the airport manager and let the airport manager know, because we need somebody on site to make the calls as to whether something needs to be moved or doesn't need to be moved, where is it located, what's its impact on the airport, does a NOTAM have to be issued, should the runway be closed, the airport be closed. Those are kinds of decisions that the airport manager should make. And then number 3, and this should all happen in quick succession, is you render aid. And when you render aid, the important element that's taught to every emergency service provider, first responder, EMT, paramedics, firemen, is don't become a victim. So you assess the situation and figure out, can you safely help this person and get this person out? And if you can, you do it as quickly as possible. And that usually means pulling them away from something that could be on fire or is on fire. But you don't want to become a victim, because then you've just made it even harder for the 911 people who are professionals who are trained in this to deal with that situation. And then beyond that is, what do you do with the aircraft when it's sitting there? And it's really the pilot's obligation, A, to call NTSB and to notify them, and B, to deal with his or her, the aircraft that he or she was operating. But if it's an accident, the federal law requires that NTSB get immediate notification. Now, they don't define immediate, but the idea is, as soon as you get your wits together, you're supposed to call them. And what's an accident? An accident is when there's damage to property on the airport, not the airplane, but to property caused by the airplane of $25,000 or more, or serious injury. And they don't define serious injury, so there's probably a little bit of a gray area there.
30.5 does.
Pardon me?
49 CFR 830.5 is the definitions, and serious injury is entire paragraph.
Okay.
Broken bones, not counting fingers, toes, and nose. Hospitalization within 7 days. There's a whole list of stuff.
Right. I'll take a look.
There is in there.
I'll take a look at those regs. But I mean, the bottom line is in the three things, well, at least two of the three that happened over the weekend, there were no injuries. And there's a question as to whether there was a requirement to even report to NTSB. However, in each case, all three of the cases, the pilot requested other people to help them move the wreckage, and that's what happened. And I don't think we want to discourage our airport tenants from jumping in and helping, but we should make sure our airport tenants make sure that it's the responsibility of the pilot, and that it's the pilot who's requesting them, and that the pilot understands that they're coming to the scene as good Samaritans, they're coming to help, and they very well may damage the airplane further in moving it, and the pilot needs to accept that responsibility. And so Member Vowell's disagreeing with me here.
Advisory Circular 150/6200-13 is mandatory for FAA grant recipients. It details responsibilities for first responders and for the airport itself. It's our responsibility to protect the crash scene and not allow it to be moved in cases where 830.10 requires that the scene be protected. So if you're totally on the mark with the 911, because as soon as the sheriffs show up, the sheriffs know the protocol. They know that they're protected to the scene until the NTSB releases, but we have a responsibility as a grant recipient not to touch the wreckage.
Okay, so you are correct as to certain accidents, but as to other accidents where they are simply non-reportable incidents, that's not required. Now, there will be some accidents where it's in our best interest not to touch anything, whether we can or we can't. Point in case is when the Hawker 80 had the head-on with the glider spiraling into it above Minden, and the woman pilot, who was an incredible pilot, landed wheels up in Carson City. At the time, we had a member of the airport authority who was trying to get us to push the airplane, this NetJet Hawker 80, off the runway so we could open the airport. Well, that was not going to happen. Thankfully, the airport manager and I were both on scene and say, no, we're not doing that because we know what will happen. NetJets will show up and say, well, we would have totaled it. We might have totaled it, but now we have to total it because you've damaged it, and then we're on the hook for it. So there's certain kinds of accidents where you have to make a judgment call as to what you're going to do. In that one, it was fairly clear, at least it was very clear to both me and the airport manager, we weren't moving that thing. And of course, NetJets got there, so we closed the airport because that thing was disabled on the runway. Fortunately, NetJets got somebody up there later that night, and by the morning, they were directing the movement of the Hawker 80, which was totaled off the runway. And you're right, in that case, and in many cases, the police department, the sheriff's department, will send out somebody to protect the crash site until NTSB clears it. In some cases, as an example, over that weekend, a call was made to NTSB and they just said, take some pictures, move the thing, preserve it. We don't want it sitting so close to the runway that it constitutes a hazard to landing aviation. And when you look at the number of calls that NTSB gets, I get the feeling that that's a fairly frequent response. Take lots of pictures, put it in a safe place, we'll get back to you in a week or so. But I think the important thing is that we have some kind of protocol here that involves calling 911 first, because I think there's an urge for everybody to run out and be the hero and help take care of this thing, and what they really should do is activate 911. And I'll tell you, I've talked to the dispatch centers. They don't care if they get 15 calls, as long as they get at least one call so that they can do what they need to do. The problem occurs when they don't get that call and don't find out about it until later, when they could have done something. And so that's all I really wanted to say in terms of legal counsel's report. I've been researching it a bunch, and thanks, Brian, for the additional citations. I'll take a look at those. And at the April meeting of the Nevada Airports Association? April or March? March. End of March. I'll have more information because I'm going to do a presentation there on what an airport manager should do when the airplane arrives upside down. And so, at any rate, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Any questions of Mr. Takis before we move on? Seeing none, we will move on to the treasurer's report. Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In front of you, you all have this month's report. The first is the balance sheet. If I draw your attention to the very last report there, the profit and loss versus previous year comparison, but bottom line, you'll see that we are up going through July 1st year to date through January. There are some changes when you get to other income, and that's really timing of some of our grant funding versus expenses. But we're currently on track. I had time to spend a little bit with Beth Cohn to make a few adjustments for January. And I know, Madam Chair, I believe she met with you, so I'm sure you had your hand in there too. You've been doing a lot of time in this interim process. I appreciate. And yes, I believe you set up a time with Beth. Was that March 8th? 11?
I think that's what it is. I have.
Yeah, so Dirk, I think there is
Yeah.
a time coming, we'll all get
Yeah.
together coming up in a couple of weeks to start the budget process. So, yeah, if you have any
Question
questions.
for you, Larry?
Please.
And it could be just a timing issue. I noticed that the land lease number was down, in particular in January, 18 over 17. And July 17 through January 18, that land lease number was also down. Any idea why, or is that just a timing of when the funds come in?
I have an answer for that. When Beth was here last year, the adjustment for the year-end land lease on the prepaid leases hadn't been adjusted at that
Okay.
point.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
And also, when I met with Beth, I asked her to provide me with a listing of what made up the deferred lease account. She did that. She showed me the method by which it's done, and it's balanced as we made a cash transfer in order to balance it to the 12/31 accrued balances, and it is reconciled.
Okay.
So we're good with that, and I think last year it just didn't get done until
just
later
curious.
on, till almost the 1st of March. Yeah, yes, and I have to tell you, I am curious about money. And, and because of that, one of the things that I've noticed, as well as other people on the board, I've had conversations with Larry about it, and I've had conversations with Brian. We have a significant amount of money on deposit, and our bank provides very little in the way of interest-bearing account money. And I have contacted the state treasurer's office. They have what's called a pooled collateral fund that we, because of being established under statutes of Nevada 844, may be able to participate in. I was supposed to have a meeting with them yesterday and was hoping to bring back some information on that, but the person who I had the meeting with was out sick, and so that's been rescheduled. But even if we were to put out of the two accounts that have the high balances in them, even if we took $600,000 of that money and put it in there, we have the potential of making somewhere close to $12,000 a year in interest. And if we can do that, we can hire a person to do our admin and bookkeeping with new money that we've never had before that will help us greatly when we hire the new manager.
Yep.
So anyway, I just wanted to bring you up to date on what I've been working on with that. And that ties in with the treasurer's report, so I thought I'd do it at this time. Anything further, Mr. Harvey?
No, thank you, and appreciate your bringing that up to me. Like I said, I just don't like spending my money before I get it, so, but it's a great idea.
Yes, my compliments, because that's the highlight of my evening.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Harvey. So moving on from there, we have reports from the authority members. I wanted to cover a couple things. Vice Chairman Val and I and Gary Province, our maintenance person, met with Senderlite this morning to do two things. One was to discuss the access gate that's going to be moved from the northeast corner of the rock quarry on the east end. West on Arrowhead, maybe 300 yards.
Midway down the block?
Yeah, it's midway down the block on Arrowhead to the west. The city, that's going to be a cooperative effort between the city, Cinder Light, and the airport. And I wanted clarification on what each of us was responsible for. Gary Lehman from Cinder Light explained that he had met with the city. The city is going to do all the permitting and the engineering. Cinder Light is going to be responsible for providing, when we get the gate area moved, it requires closure gates that are bigger than the ones that we have at the corner right now. So they talked to us about what we're going to need as far as the materials on the gates are concerned. They're going to do the road grading, they're going to do the approaches, they're going to do the drainage underneath the road. And as part of that, we've had 30-inch concrete culverts out on the northeast area of the airport for several years, and they're going to use those as part of that project, so we won't have cash outlay for that. And then there's going to be, there's a requirement with the city that anytime you join into an existing road, that the driveway portion has to be asphalted for a period of, area of 25 feet. Either way of that access, or a total of 25 feet from that access. And when we were discussing that, Cinder Light said they would provide the crushed DG for the base, they would provide the ground asphalt to go on it, but it would have to be sealed and covered over the top of it. And rather than us, we would be responsible for that cost, and rather than them having to bill us and then us pay them, then them pay us for the rocks, we discussed just simply having them accumulate those costs, give us a cost estimate on it, and deduct that from that month's rock sales. So
And they estimated the 5,000.
yeah, they estimated that would be about $5,000. So other than going out and buying the gates and providing the culverts and so forth, it's going to be minimal cost to us, and we are not responsible for the engineering or the permitting, and I'm really happy about that. In addition to that, I'm going to let Vice Chairman Val talk to you about what they told us about the status of the rock project.
So I had, when we met with them, I had a couple of concerns about the safety of flight operations near that pit. Tearing down the mountain because it was a hazard to flight and then creating a big hole kind of is a little bit of a man-made hazard. There was quite a bit of a drop-off. So based on their estimates that they gave us, they think that there'll be probably 3 or 4 more years worth of material, which is going to require some effort on our part to do an extension. I think we said it was up in 19?
Yes.
19, okay. So there should be an extension coming. I personally kind of conveyed to them that, you know, the way that the air hits the pit causes a bit of an air curtain for smaller aircraft that have to fly through, and it's a bit hazardous. So I stressed that as soon as we can try to get the project graded and bring that slope down on at least over the approach into the runway as soon as possible would be in everybody's best interest. There was also myself and a couple other people have noticed that their excavator is visible at certain times during the day above the taxiway. So they're working along that edge, and I didn't really get a good idea from him of like how long they're going to be over there, but that was basically to the north side of the runway is where they're thinking that the bulk of the material is that they're after right now is. They also expressed a whole lot of discontent regarding the previous contractor who had torn the hill down and how they had just kind of dumped really, really large boulders in there to build the runway with. They're having a lot of difficulty. It's breaking machines, it's breaking their tools and stuff like that. So I personally, the vibe that I was getting was that they're not real interested in doing much with all that mess with the larger boulders unless they can find a buyer. Now, they think there's 2 or 3 large civil engineering projects that may come out to bid soon that may have a use for those. But if they don't win any of those bids, then they just kind of don't have much interest in the large 8, 10, 12-foot boulders that they can't do much with. So I think he said that they're going to honor the the agreement with the sloping and all that, the 3-to-1 slope, but it may take them a while to get to the point where they can put it back. My visual estimate, the bottom of the pit to the runway level is about 2 excavators tall. So I'm thinking 4.5, 5 stories at this point. And that really flies in the face of the whole purpose of us buying that property in the first place, for having a safety overrun. Without any arresting material at that end of the runway, if somebody slides off, they're going to take a 5-story drop once they go over the edge. So they understand that now. They weren't, I don't think they were really clear or cognizant of what their actions, what kind of impact they were having on airplanes. So I guess we'll see what they come up with. They did mention a couple numbers. They thought that on an annual basis there was it 40,000 tons of material was extractable, and based on the estimates from the original survey, that's where they came up with the idea that they think there's probably 3 or 4 more years worth of material left in there. So I know I was personally, and I think Larry was a little concerned about what happens when the rocks run out and how soon are we to that? Are we 3 months away or 3 years away? But their estimate is about 3 to 4 years. Yeah.
The other thing they mentioned in supplementing that comment was they're going to do some excavation between where the big boulders are and the beginning of the slope, the closest part to the runway, undermine that, and that way they can push those big boulders back into that area and then build over the top of them with fill. So I think they're really on the right track at this point as far as making the approach to the airport safer for aviation. It's just going to take them a while. So they're more aware of what we need right now, and I think that they're going to try to look for solutions rather than just moving along as they've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years. Mr. Val.
They were very cooperative and very receptive to our suggestions. One suggestion that I have is that we might want to put out a permanent NOTAM at some point, notifying aircraft that there are excavators in that area and that they are visible in the flight path, and also that there are wind effects from that pit. Someone who's never been here before, we had someone just last winter who was checking out one of our aircraft and almost lost control of the airplane at that point because the wind was blowing at such the right angle, it hit the pit and then shot straight upward. And that's not a normal behavior for winds on an approach end of an airport. So I think we might want to put a NOTAM out and just notify people that there is a hazard to flight in that area and they should be aware of it.
So that would be available when the wind's blowing out of the east, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, when it comes from runway from the east and it hits 9, because of the height of where that pit is right now and the fact that the runway sticks out, there's now this wall of rock, and when the wind hits it, it's got to go somewhere, so it shoots straight up. And that happens to be right at the point where anybody coming into land on final is very slow, low, vulnerable, and easy to lose control.
But why would somebody be landing on 27 if the wind's coming out of the east?
Because
that's our calm wind runway.
Yeah, they shouldn't, Steve. You'd be shocked at how many times I've seen that. Because they're used to it, because they always land 27. Should they land runway 9? Oh yeah. Do they? No.
Well, there's habit. It's a calm wind, so 5-6 knot. People will still land on 27 for noise abatement. 5 or 6 knots at just the right angle is enough to do that. And then the instrument approach that we have is aligned to 27. It's not aligned to runway 9. So somebody in a heavier jet may do that, but it's usually the heavier mass, the heavier jets that aren't affected by it. It's the smaller planes. The small single pistons, we're the ones that get hit by that really hard.
So I think if there's a NOTAM out there, it should mention the easterly winds, because we have a wind study that shows 95.5% of the time the winds are blowing from the west the right way. So this is kind of the aberration, and that's what we should be alerting them to. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Well, and the hazard of the excavator out there. I don't think most people flying are expecting to see big excavators poking up, as they're coming in.
Do we have any opportunity to make a contractual obligation, or do we have a contractual obligation with Cinder Light to fix the overrun problem at some point in time?
They have a remediation agreement in their contract.
Okay.
But one of the suggestions that Mr. Val made this morning in that meeting was that there are airports that have overrun areas that are like truck ramps, runaway truck ramps, where they've got soft material between the end of the pavement and... What is that called?
EMAS.
Yeah. And so it would be between the end of the paved area and the ultimate end of the property out there.
We don't even have that. We just have hard rock.
Right. So it's pretty flat out there right now, and if anybody lost control and went over it, that's what we're concerned about. So in the remediation process, I think that we would be legitimately within our charge to have that EMAS area, to build an EMAS area out there, even if we do have the slope.
That's a manufactured material, though, EMAS,
Yeah,
right? It's not just standard rock road
No,
grade.
but and it's also a very expensive product. The best thing would be to create something like the runaway truck ramp to where there is a softer material to help arrest the aircraft prior to getting to the danger point. For the deceleration, right, which can be done right off the edge of the existing overrun through to their area that there will be remediating, thank you, and then continuing down that slope to meeting the flat area down below. That could be something that could be done as well to help alleviate those potential problems. And I do agree that if they started that effort along the flight line right now where there is that wall and so forth, that would be a good start, even if it is a temporary item to help with the aircraft. And it wasn't, I don't believe it was really outlined in their effort that it was going to be done during the course of the project or just at the end of the project, but it was going to have to be done at one point, yes.
They said in our meeting that they were going to start remediation as soon as they finished excavating the north area in that lot.
Cool.
They were going to start that process earlier than when they were finished with the job.
And there was also a lot of the piles that are out there is not piles of material that they're extracting from the site. It's piles that they're laying aside to use for the remediation work later. Right now, those piles are a little bit dangerous because you could end up, bumping in between them and all that kind of stuff. The plan that was in the contract that we took with us, and they had a copy of it on the table, calls for a 3-to-1 slope down from the end of the runway. There's like 50 foot or something like that, or 75 foot.
It's about 300 feet from the overrun itself to where that area would start.
But it calls for a 3-to-1 slope, and that's what they're going to remediate. But right now, it's more like a 50-to-0. It's not 3-to-1. You just go over the edge, and they won't do that until they've excavated out the material that's actually usable for them, and then they're going to put back the stuff they don't want.
And is the remediation work bonded?
Yes. Yeah, the entire contract is bonded, and the contract includes the remediation work at the end.
Great.
Okay, does anybody else have information or reports to the authority before we finish?
Is that John Masing an official invite for the public?
Yes, well, for the community, yeah. I do have two other brief things before Brian gets into his item. I met with Captain David Rubin from the fire department, and they are again working on an addressing system for the airport for emergency response. I gave the maps to Brian Fitzgerald for review, and I think that they are making it far more difficult than it should be, and more confusing for our tenants than it should be. But if you want to take a look at those maps, I may have Steve or Brian scan them and put them up on the website so that we could all take a look at them and make suggestions and kind of have an open comment period. I would suggest that we might do that.
Yeah, Steve and I will work together to get that available to everybody.
Okay. And then secondarily, or lastly rather, I want to thank Bradley and Larry for attending the open meeting and ethics presentation that was given by the Attorney General's office. We were there with Steve most of that morning, and if there are those of you who would like to watch that, I think that the AG's office is going to have it posted on their website within the next couple of weeks. And so I would encourage you to take the time to look at that. I don't have anything else, so Vice Chair Val.
I don't either.
You
already mentioned it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tomorrow night, if you're interested, the John Mays thing is from 6 to 7?
6 to 7 at his hangar.
Yeah, 6 to 7 at his hangar to talk about the circumstances and possible solutions for the incidents and accidents that we've had in the last few weeks. So with that, if there's no further comment, I would suggest that the meeting be adjourned at 8:35.
I'll move it.
All in favor? Okay.
Second.
Moved by Member Golden, seconded by Vice Chair Val, and All in favor? Aye. All opposed? We're out of here.